Let's get started.
Okay.
Thank
Cool.
you I want to thank everyone who is here. Yeah, this is a long day. I'm not sure how many people here have been in all the panels, but there's been a lot of really great discussions happening, and I'm sure that one will not disappoint you. So the moderator, and I'm Pamela Bush, by the way. I feel like I've been saying it so many times, I'm not really sure.
Maybe you need a T-shirt that just says your name, and then you don't have to.
Okay, I'll be honest with you about the T-shirt. So this is a little family promotions, but this panel, and Olivia will tell you this, has been sponsored by my sister's company called Pipin, and this is a Pipin T-shirt. But I have a bunch of the shirts and I love them. So that I could ask my sister if she would consider doing that. Although I hate name tags, so I definitely don't want a T-shirt with my name on it. At any rate, though, I am the founder of Wine Fair and the Vineyard, and am stoked to be having this. This is, I would say right now, 5 o'clock, the perfect time to be having cider. So thank you, Ellen, for making the Super Diva. It's really delicious. Our moderator is Olivia Maki. I first met Olivia years ago when she worked at 18 Reasons and was doing educational programming, and I was teaching some classes. And then I ran into Olivia again, I guess it was last year, it was the beginning of 2020. And I had heard about Redfield Cider, the cider bar and shop that she and her husband opened up, but I hadn't had a chance to get over there. So I was over there at an event, and then we started talking. It's like, oh, yeah. So when I was thinking about this panel, I was like, okay, I think Olivia would be the perfect person to moderate it. And she said yes, and suggested a really wonderful group of panelists. So I'm going to turn over to you, Chenoa. I didn't see you before. Hello, and thank you for making it. Thank you all. I thank everyone for being here, and have a great time. I am going to pop myself out.
Thanks, Pamela. So good to see you. Thanks for leading us in. That's really exciting, and I'm excited. I'm actually drinking the same thing that Pamela is, which is this co-ferment for those who joined early from Tilted Shed. So, woo! And I also wanted to say a special thank you to our sponsor, Pipin Couture, which is the reason we're able to have this panel today. So thank you so much for that, which is also Pamela's sister's company. So I love that family biz connection. So today we're gonna just start off and do a really quick roundtable introduction so everybody can know who everyone else is for all the folks who are joining us. And then I have some great questions, and we're gonna dive in and we're gonna nerd out and we're gonna keep drinking, and it's gonna be great. I'm so excited. Rosalind, do you wanna kick us off?
Unmuting
and maybe say who you are, what your company is, what the general vibe is, and then also what you're drinking right now.
Okay. My name is Rosalind Reynolds. I make Emme wines. That's my brand. I mainly focus on old school California varieties like Carignan and Colombard and Zinfandel. And then I also make a couple of smaller experimental batches of cider grape, sometimes plum, other fruit co-ferments. Right now, I'm drinking none of that, unfortunately. I'm actually at a wedding in Colorado, and I didn't bring any of my own booze. So I'm just drinking a nice amber ale because it's all that they had here for me. So
beer's delicious.
Oh, no, I'm not complaining. It's definitely good. It's just not really on brand.
Yeah. Awesome. Hi, Chenoa. Do you want to go next? Thanks for joining. Nice to see you.
You too. Hi, I'm Chenoa. I'm the co-winemaker and co-owner of Ashanta Wines. Very new, just started in 2020. It was the first commercial vintage, and we do a range of wines from fruit co-ferments to pet nats to big bold California reds, and then red white blends. We're kind of exploring all different avenues. And right now I'm actually drinking our elderberry co-ferment that we did with French Colombard from Solano County.
Ooh, amazing.
My process is actually really similar to yours, Ellen's, with using a cloth bag to get the elderberry juice out and also freezing it because it came in so early. But we'll get into that later, I think.
Yeah, we can definitely dig into that later. Ellen, do you want to go next?
Hi, thanks for having me. This is exciting. I am Ellen Cavalli, and with my husband Scott, I'm co-owner, whatever, cider evangelist, just the two of us running the show. So I do all the things, right? My husband's the main cider maker, but I've been really involved in a lot of our co-ferments, or as I call them, our food shed ferments. So that gives you an idea about our ethos, really localizing and giving due respect to all the fruits, but we're definitely apple focused. We started here in Sonoma County in 2011. So this is our 10th year. We're still here. We are really dedicated to 100% Sonoma County apples, very much into supporting our local farmers, organic dry farm, growing our own apples here. I have a seedling project. I'm also the founder of the zine Malice. So I spread myself thin, but I like it that way because I have a lot of interests, and I really am into exploration and seeing what the earth can give you and what I can give back. So that's kind of cool. And I am starting off with a cocktail because it's been a long day and I needed something to perk me up. So this is a little cider Aperol spritz. So it's with one of our Gravenstein ciders. So Aperol, some sparkling water, some blood orange, and I have a bottle of Super Diva in the freezer because everybody else is drinking it. But I would love to try that elderberry co-ferment because we also use elderberry. So this is gonna be fun. I wish I had all your stuff and we'll just drink it. But
We'll make that happen. We'll make that happen. Yeah. Amazing. So maybe to just like set some boundaries or like talk about terminology for a second. I think over the course of the next hour plus, when we talk about cider, I'm thinking about that as fruit, specifically apple and pear, that's fermented into alcohol, like those two palms. That's like just as like a rough definition. And then when we're talking about co-ferments, we're talking about fermenting different types of fruits together. Does that seem like a fair like baseline? I know that we could nerd out about like quince and stuff like that, but just to set some parameters. Is that good? Yeah. Okay. Cool. You can fight me on it. I'm prepared for that. No. Okay. No fights. Okay. So I thought it would be interesting to start off and talk a little bit about what's the difference between working with apples and grapes. I mean, we can also talk about other fruit too. I love this cider we're talking about, or this co-ferment we've been talking about with plums. But I think a lot of times when I think about co-ferments, and the conversation with Pamela sort of started around this conversation of like, okay, there's natural wine and the cider, and then there's this natural mingling of the two. And I have a later question about ferments versus blending, but I thought first we could just let's talk about apples and grapes and how they're different and how they're similar. Rosalind, do you want to kick it off and talk about your experience with those two specific types of fruit?
Sure. I will. Let me pick on one difference that was important to me when I started fermenting apples. So I've worked with grapes for how many years? 7 years? A long time, a while. I know them pretty well. I started working with apples a year or two ago with Alan's help, and there was definitely many things to learn. The most important thing for me was that the pH of grapes versus apples is often quite different. So, and this is not a hard and fast rule for everywhere. I know that things in Vermont are different. I know that things other places are probably different, but for California at least, from what I've seen, the pH of grapes is often lower than the pH of apples. And again, there are differences within that even because there's not just one apple. There are many, many, many different types of apples, but the apples that I was working with at least, which I think were Gravenstein, so a kind of standard apple for the Sonoma area, pH is much higher than the grapes that I've been working with. And what that means is, so your pH determines what will and what won't grow within your wine or cider. The lower the pH, the fewer bacteria are likely to colonize. Having a low pH is usually better because it means that fewer bacteria will grow, which means that you'll have fewer issues with your wine or cider. So fewer problems with VA, which is vinegar, with mousiness, with other taints like that. Because cider has a higher pH, more things might grow, not always, but you definitely, or for me as a winemaker, I had to be a little more careful with ciders than I am with my wines. Making sure to eliminate oxygen, making sure to keep everything hyper clean, which we do anyway, but just being extra, extra careful. So that was, to me, the biggest difference that I had to work with the two of them.
Awesome. Chenoa, Ellen, either of you want to chime in about the difference between working with those two fruits?
My first time working with cider was with grapes. And so it was kind of interesting. I feel like I more so was learning about co-ferments than necessarily like the different aspects of them, because I got grape juice from a farmer, and then put it into oak barrels and let it ferment until about 3, and then that's when I started to add pressed skins from Carignan and Viognier. But I mean, the big difference to me, obviously, is just the ABV, but also that it can offer still so much like complexity and structure, whereas sometimes if you get like lower ABV grapes, they're not going to be fully ripened and you're going to kind of lose some of that structure. Or cider, it can be low ABV but like carry all of these complexities, which I think is extremely fascinating about it, and how I want to continue to work with it further.
Ellen, anything you want to add there?
Of course, you know me. Well, I would agree with both of these discussions here about the differences. I mean, we work with up to 100 different varieties of apples per year. And so we have a lot of experience with a wide range of different characteristics and composition of apples. And so, but on the whole, if you're talking about the standard heirloom apples that grow here in Sonoma County, the Gravenstein, Golden Delicious Jonathan, Rome, Newtown Pippin, on the whole, you know, you're at 3.4, 3.5 with pH. And so that definitely will differ from, you know, many of the grapes. And we also work with a lot of bittersweet apples, a lot of crab apples. And so there'll be a variation from 3 to 4, right? And so you have to be really cognizant of the pH when you're doing single variety fermentations, because we do all native yeast fermentations and very, very minimal sulfur and then nothing else. So we also have to practice a lot of cleanliness in our cidery. Just be really aware of it, because things can go off. And so we have to be very careful. My husband, who's really the primary cider maker, he's done a harvest at a winery before, and coming from there and going like, whoo, it's so much easier in a lot of ways to make wine with grapes than it is with cider because of those sorts of differences. Other things to think about, apples are primarily malic acid. So we're not dealing with your tartaric acids and all your other different acids that you are working with grapes. The botanical name for apples is malus or malus, and that's where malic comes from. So there's definitely an issue with malolactic fermentation just being really spontaneous, and it's very pernicious. Like, we cannot stop it. We'll have co-fermentations, primary and mallow at the same time sometimes. So just knowing different acids that you're working with and what they're going to go to, and also realizing that cider, because of its lower ABV, even though here in Sonoma County we have really high ripeness levels, so it's not dramatically different from like one of Rosalind's, which will be 11%. I have ciders that are 10.5 naturally. So it's not a huge difference, but they can definitely kind of go off the rails sometimes on that. And then a few other little things are phenolics. So, there are definitely tannic cider apples, but the phenolics within those will express differently from grapes, right? I don't know why exactly, what the biological and chemical breakdowns are, but they do express themselves a little differently. And I'll have a lot of people who will drink one of our ciders that have bittersweets, which are high tannin, low acid apples, in the blend, and they'll go, Brett, and we'll go, nope. Like, that's the phenolics in those cider apples. That's the French bittersweets, and that's what they give. So it helps. You have to learn how to like retrain your palate a little bit. We actually had it tested for Brett multiple times to prove there's no Brett. Those are the phenolics in the apples. So it has to retrain your palate too. And some other little key difference, and I'm gonna stop, I promise, is I often call white wine grape cider. And the reason for that is I find that there's a lot of similarities in a lot of different white grapes, the typicities of it, some tropical notes, some citrus notes, a little bit of herbal notes, those sorts of things that I find a lot in ciders, especially if you're using things like Wixen or some of the crab apples. And I don't like them meshing together with apples. And so my preference, I feel like the red wine grapes can give you a whole set of different flavor profiles that are not easily accessible through apples. But apples and grapes, when they're white, there's a lot of parallels. And that's just off the top of my head.
Are you saying you don't like my Columbar Jonathan cider, Ellen?
I'm just saying it's not what I would do, Rosalind, but I love everything you do. But I'm looking for a different expression, and because I'm working with so many different apples, I can kind of capture what you can do with grapes with apples. You don't have, not many people have access to the wide, 100 different varieties like we do. So that matters, right? I love your stuff. There's no judgment here, no criticism. But with what we have, I feel like I can get at that flavor profile with my different, maybe I'm gonna throw some transcendent crab apple in there, like those things can hit those notes, but I can't hit what a Carignan can, or something like that. So that for me is where I spend a lot of our time, is more in the red, white grape world.
I guess that's actually another difference to note between grapes and apples, is that for grapes, a large part of winemaking is fermentation on skins. For white grapes sometimes, but definitely for red grapes, that red color in red wine comes from the skins. And with apples, as far as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, Ellen, you don't usually use the skins of the apples in your fermentations.
That's correct. So there will be some people who will macerate on the skins. So you'll, I don't know, Liv, whether we need to talk about the process, I'll let you decide. But
yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting thing to get into, and I especially thinking about maceration on skins it's also like a regional thing too. So it's like really common to do in Normandy and France, but like less common to do in the United States. So like I'd love to hear about your process, Ellen. I think that's a great question.
Right, and I'm sure the whole panel has various perspectives, and we've done both. Just a real briefly for anybody who's new to cider and how it's made, because I know there can be some confusion. People often conflate it with beer, or they don't know where cider comes from, and I can dispel some of that really quickly. So what you're doing is you're taking
a way to piss off someone in the cider industry who takes it seriously is to ask if they brewed their cider.
Yeah,
their cider.
Can we swear? You're on the shit list if you do that. With a lot of us.
It's a really easy way to piss me off.
So don't do it. Don't do it. You're all on notice. But right now I can't see you, and I don't know what you've said, so you get a pass. So with apples, what you're doing is so how we do it. Actually, it's how everybody, it all starts the same. Starts with apples. You crush the apples in a mill or grinder. It becomes a very fine pomace, just this almost like not applesauce, but very shredded, okay? Very much, and it's the whole thing. It's everything in it. You don't take off the skins. You don't worry about the seeds. The seeds aren't going to, kill you with cyanide. It's fine. And the skins go in there. And to know that this is a key thing, right? That you'll find a lot of your tannins in your skins, right? On grapes, that's primarily where the tannin comes from. With the apples, especially these tannic cider apples, which we don't have to geek out about, but I have a lot on my shirt right now. The tannins, the phenolics, are actually within the flesh and a little bit on the skins, but it's primarily the flesh of the apples. So you shred all these apples, it becomes this big pumice. There's multiple ways that you can squeeze the juice. You can do a basket press, a hydraulic rack and cloth press, a squeeze press that goes like this. Some way of extracting the juice. Pressing, you have to apply pressure. There's not a whole lot of free run with apples. A little bit, but it's not like you wouldn't be doing free run cuts and not on the whole. Press that juice, okay, until it's pretty dry. And if you have a good press and a good grinder, you can get 3 gallons to the bushel, which is 150 gallons per ton, which is pretty much the same as wine. more or less, depending on fruit. But let's just generalize it as kind of the same yield, right, Roz? Okay. So, so you have the juice, and then after that, everything is basically like white wine. You ferment it. You could choose your tank. You can choose your vessel. If you want to inoculate, you can, or you don't have to. But at that point, on the whole, the process is like making white wine. Okay. There are people who do macerate on the skins a little bit with cider, and the reason for that is maybe the apples weren't super ripe. Over here, the ripeness is not a problem. Acid is a problem. It's really hard for us to maintain high acidity in our apples because of our growing conditions. We go months and months and months. Everything here is dry farmed. There's no rain. It's hot, and that's going to like lower the acid, so high pH, and bring up those sugars. So we have problems with acidity, but never a problem with ripeness. But in some places they will, and so they'll maybe sweat the apples or let them like dehydrate a little bit so that they can get more sugars out of it. And then sometimes when they'll grind it, they'll macerate it on the skins to extract a little more complexity, some tannins or something like that. We on the whole we've tried it before, and you can start like working on some real acidic character there. So I don't recommend it depending on your conditions. But when we'll grind like quince, we do macerate. So we'll let it stay overnight and macerate on the skins. So there's just you could try it out, but we have, and I would recommend not doing that. And then with the grapes, we've done two ways. We work with our neighbors, Two Shepherds, are really great neighbors of ours, very generous, and it's great resource sharing. They'll give us some either pressed juice from their must, or they'll just give us grapes. And so we've done both things. We've done just pressed juice, co-ferment juice on juice, and then we've also done whole fruit, like whole cluster or somewhat whole cluster on fresh pressed apples. So that's two ways of doing it.
Yeah, two things I want to just follow up on that you said, Ellen. So you mentioned that your cider, can get up to like 10.5% ABV. So that's not necessarily for like if anyone's joining us like internationally or from different regions outside Northern California. It's worth saying we are all located in Northern California. That's not necessarily indicative of all cider, right? A lot of cider you're seeing close to like 6, 7, 8%, but where Ellen is, it's so hot. There's a lot more sugar in her apples. She's getting a lot higher ABV than you might see other ciders around the country and really even around the world. So that was just one thing I wanted to point out to just follow up on what you said, Ellen. And then also with the macerating on skins, if cider makers are doing that, it's for like a day or two. It's not, we're not talking about weeks, and we're certainly not talking about months, nothing like that. I think some of the cider makers I've talked to in France, it's maybe 2 days, maybe something like that. So cool. Thanks, Ellen. So the title of this talk is Cider and Co-Ferment. And so in my mind, when we're talking about co-ferments, we're talking about fermenting juice together. But one thing that's also common or not uncommon is fermenting types of juice separately and then blending. And having the end result be a separate fermentation that's blended together. Chenoa, what are you doing? Are you co-fermenting? Are you blending? And what's your process behind that?
We've co-fermented pretty much everything that we've done, ranging from just our grape varietals and then our apples and fruit varietals. For the apples, I feel like we're kind of like opposite than you, Ellen. It was where we processed all the fruit and then got the apple juice. And worked with it kind of on the winemaking side or just like processing grape side. But we made a cider, and I think we got the juice late August. It was from Occidental's, a farmer's field blend of Jonathan apple, Gravenstein, Rhode Island green, and like a couple others thrown in there. And that similar day when our juice had dropped to like 3 bricks, and we were kind of interested in doing a co-ferment and playing around with cider and these grape skins that we wanted to upcycle the use of. So we were processing a risotto around the similar time. It was actually able to take the Carignan grape must and Viognier grape must, and took about like a half a ton of that into a fermenter, and then pumped the apple juice from barrels into like a 1 ton fermenter, and waited till it got to 1.5 and bottled it under cap. But it's interesting, you know, talking about acid and pH, because the Carignan we got was really, really high in acid, or low in acid. So we were able to add that element. And then we're also able to add kind of this like cranberry earthiness, and then these like floral notes that came from the Viognier, which is really exciting. And then obviously the apple juice picked up on all the Carignan. So it's like, it's 96% apples, but it comes out this bright, you know, bright kind of pink fuchsia, which can be slightly disorienting. But it is, you know, majority cider, and that was kind of a beautiful process to see. And then for our elderberry, we picked wild elderberry from the San Gabriel Mountains, which is outside of LA. And we had been kind of watching them ripen throughout the summertime, just from hiking up there. And right when we were leaving to move north to do harvest at Tony's, we went up and we picked the elderberry. And this was at this point mid-August, early to mid-August. So we also had to freeze them until we got a week later or 2 weeks later our Colombard. And what we did with the elderberry is we like foot stomped it with a cheesecloth in a bucket to get all of the juice, and then transferred that juice in just to 1 barrel of Colombard that we reserved. So that also co-fermented together, which I think is really fascinating, kind of what we're more interested in doing over blends, just like getting kind of all these elements together and really, really securing them into one entity.
Rosalind, what's your process there?
Actually,
Blending versus co-fermenting.
Pretty similar to Chenoa. I am most interested in co-fermenting, and it's for 2 reasons. First of all, like she mentioned, upcycling. After I press my grapes, I have a lot of grape skins that still have some sugar, some acid, some juice in them. The press, especially one of the presses I use, doesn't like fully press all the juice out, so there's quite a bit of material left. So it's a nice way to use that material. Take some apple juice, pour it on top of those grape skins that are pressed of most of their juice, but still retaining some juice as well as the skins, and then let that ferment to create something new. And then the second reason is, so I think I mentioned before that pH was the biggest thing I noticed between grapes and apples. My first time making cider, it actually didn't go very well at all. I had a really high pH and the cider went bad and I didn't get to sell it, which was a bummer. So the next time I made cider, I thought I would try to fix that problem by fermenting the cider on grape skins in the hopes that the fermentation process would pull more acid, more sugar, more tannin out of those skins, which the alcohol, sugar goes up, alcohol goes up. Higher alcohol is a little bit like more sanitary. Raising acid means dropping pH, means fewer bacteria will grow, so it's more protected. And then also uptaking some tannin from the grape skins. Tannin also act as like inhibitors of oxygen, so a third way to try and keep things from growing in there that I don't want to grow. And then also just the interest, what will happen flavor-wise when I let these 2 things, grape skin, together. So I've done it that way a couple different times, and that's, you know, blending. I think I see Darlene asked if what if we like, you know, fermenting, co-fermenting, and then also blending and seeing what the difference is. Yeah, that is interesting, and maybe we should try that. That would probably be pretty cool to see up to this point. I just haven't honestly really had any interest in blending.
I feel like when you're foraging, or you have, because I know, Rosalind, you had plum, right? And that was just from a backyard that you were playing with. When you can only like forage and find a small amount, sometimes I don't think you have the option to just do separate fermentations. And also you're not sure about the nutrients that is there. So if you know, like you have really great grapes that are like have a lot of nutrients in their yeast, because we are doing native yeast fermentations, it's really helpful in that process.
Awesome. Ellen, What do you got?
So we've done a lot of, so, you know, we started by fermenting all these other fruits besides, before we started making working with apples or grapes. We fermented other things beforehand. So before our Tilted Shed days, Scott and I, you know, our whole focus was trying to grow and ferment all the things, and to remember that fermentation really just is a form of preservation. And so we were really into that sort of movement and ethos. And so we've worked with plums before. We'd worked with apricots. Mulberries we fermented. I mean, so anything that grew near us, we fermented it out. And so we had a little bit of experience with them on solo, just as amateurs, as home hobbyists. And so when we started doing Tilted Shed, you know, doing other fruit, apples is always like what we're really known for, and proudly so, and I wouldn't change that at all. But the other fruits have always been part of us. They've always informed what we do. And so I have done both. Definitely have done both, because, you know, we have carboys and little demijohns all over the place of, you know, 1 gallon here, 5 gallons here, whatever. You know, we do all these little small projects and then see what do they taste like when they're together. So I've done both. We've done isolated by different fruits and then blended them post-fermentation. And then we've also done co-fermenting. Because we're so, you know, after 10 years, not going out of business, you got to hopefully know a few things about apples. So our cider, we've got kind of dialed in. We know what we're doing with that. And with the other fruit, you know, I really like using apples to complement it. I think apples offer a lot and the other fruits offer other things, and together they're beautiful. I prefer to do co-fermentations as well, even if it means freezing the fruit or setting it by, rather than doing post-fermentation blends. But there can be great things that come from it. I would say that in the spirit of experimentation, don't be afraid of doing solos, batches of things, and then blending afterwards to see if you like it. And then if you like it, that next harvest, co-ferment it, because I feel like the interplay of the fruit is much more expressive. And for what Chenoa and Rosalind are saying too, that they balance out each other's weaknesses in terms of the fermentation and maybe a more secure fermentation. But I also think that they enhance the expression of the other things. So I do prefer co-fermenting, but we have definitely done blending, and we've worked with elderberries, blackberries, slow drupes, the plums that we're speaking of are the wild cherry plums that grow on our farm. So there's a lot of experimentation that you can do. But yeah, a nice thing to do is start on single batch and then do co-ferments, because what you also need to do is figure out what apples and grapes go well together. I found out what don't go well together, so now I've learned. But
Go well together, just curiosity.
Muscat de Bernay and Grenache Blanc is terrible. Like, there's a really tannic cider apples with something. So we've really learned to choose for like more of the fruit forward, apple forward, middle of the road apples, none of these more specialized cider fruit that we use. Let those be on their own. Don't co-ferment them because there's too much dissonance. What we're looking for is them to sort of be a little lovely little marriage. And that's what I'm looking for. And the co-ferments, I find now, having done them since 2014, we've kind of figured out what is starting to work well together. But we still take risks, like that Super Diva was one of them, even though we've co-fermented with plums in the past, but it worked out. So you know.
Ellen, I think you touched on something really there, which is that so apples differ from grapes in a lot of ways. And one of the ways that cider is very distinct from wine, at least in terms of like consumer perception, is that really the best ciders, not all ciders, but some of the best ciders are really, they're blends. They're different apples coming together and playing off different strengths from those apples. And so you're not going to necessarily walk into Redfield and say, you know, I really love, you know, the way someone might say, I really love like Pinot Noir, right? I really love Pinot Noir. That's like it's the kind of wine I like to drink, that there's not that same necessary like way to like parallel to drinking cider. Like you could come in and say like, I love Kingston Black. That's a great, one of the few apples that does really well on its own and can stand on its own and be a single variety cider. But cider's specialty and you know, definitely what Tilted Shed's specialty is it's a blend, right? It's bringing the acid from one apple, the tannin from another, to be able to make this really great end product. And the type of apple you use really matters. The fruit really matters to be able to make an excellent cider, same way that it does with wine. And so I know that we're all located in Northern California, but I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about fruit and access to fruit. So something that's been hard for the cider industry, a lot of up and coming cider makers that are really passionate about what they're doing, they want to be able to source really great apples. It can be hard for them to do that. Apples take a long time to grow, and the cider industry's been growing a lot in the past 5-10 years, and the apple production hasn't necessarily stayed up with that growth. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about access to fruit, how you're thinking about sourcing fruit, and how that's been working out. Yeah. Anyone want to go first? I can keep calling on people if that's helpful too.
I guess I'll start here because if we're talking about apples in this case, because that was sort of the entree.
Yeah.
To this.
I mean, Ellen, you're going to have a really different perspective on access to fruit because you're growing a lot of it, right?
We're not actually growing a lot. We do have an orchard, and it is 2 acres, very young. We only make 1 cider out of it, and we make so 98% of our fruit comes from other orchards. So we have an orchard for sure, but it's very young and it's not very productive. And it's mostly our pomological research station. We have over 100 varieties plus 300 seedlings going. So it's really just trials here. But this is not a production orchard. So no, we are 100%, I mean, pretty much all of it is being sourced from elsewhere. And I guess we can speak as to access, but you can't talk about apples and you can't talk about it here in Sonoma County without talking about the economy, without talking what price per ton you can get for apples and the pressures that's been on the apple industry since the 1950s and especially since the 1980s and the rise of Pinot and Chardonnay. Because, you know, at World War II, at the peak here in Sonoma County, there were over 13,000 acres dedicated just to apples, primarily in the Sebastopol area where we live. And now that number is under 3,000. And pretty much as you're driving down Gravenstein Highway where we live, or anywhere here in West County, or even, you know, insofar as pockets going up towards Healdsburg, although that's a little bit out of the range, but you see a vineyard and orchard out here. So any discussion that we have about people saying, I wish I had access to this, to, you know, I wish I had more Kingston, I wish I could get my hands on Kingston Black. And I'm like, well, you could have, but where's the money going? And the money goes into premium wine grapes. The orchards are still being bulldozed and being planted and converted to wine grapes. So that is something, and I'm talking to a wine crowd here, so it's something for you all to think about. If you want to have access to more apple varieties, you have to stop plowing the orchards down. First of all, you have to start paying more for your apples, and you have to keep that commitment up. So I've been doing this 10 years. We have orchards that we've been working with the entire time, and we pay them wine grape prices, and they know they can count on us. But there have been a lot of players in this industry here in Sonoma County that have started, and they want to do what we're doing. They realize the economics isn't in their favor, and then they start bringing in juice from out of state, and they start cutting the corners and not paying it. So that's what it comes down to. If you want to have access to Kingston Black, if you want to have Wixon, if you want to have Muscat de Bernay, if you want to have Transcendent Crabapple, those don't have, on the whole, those don't have secondary markets. You can't sell that at a farmer's market, okay? They have one use and one use only, and they take a lot of effort to grow, and a lot of labor, and they're growing in the same place where you can get $5,000 per ton for grapes. So that's what it has to be, is what do you want and can you commit to it? We've committed to it the long way. And so whenever anybody complains about it, I go like, you have to commit to it and you have to pay the money for it. Because, you know, the only way that we still have access to these great apples is because our orchardists are not relying on that money for their livelihood. They're simply not. So they have other jobs. You know what I mean? This is something they do for passion. For them to be dedicated to this, they have to get paid what they're worth here in Sonoma County, which is astronomical. So that's my tirade today.
I mean, that's a really great point. And I think that's also like pretty unique to where you're located, right? Where the acreage available to grow things is finite, right? And the appellations associated with where you're growing things is there, you know, there's meaning there. And so I appreciate your rant as always, Ellen, but I also just want to take a moment for anyone who's not, you know, in Sonoma, in Napa, you know, in the sort of Northern California growing region and Mendocino, things like that, to note that issue, while I think there are points that are relevant for everyone, is something that's a really hot button topic for where we are right now. Yeah.
I actually have a question. Maybe Ellen knows the answer to this because I don't. Can you produce, so per acre, do you get more tons of apples out of that acre than you do grapes for like the same money? Like basically, is it less expensive to grow apples than grapes? And I'm wondering this because I'm wondering, there's obviously a large price discrepancy between ciders and wines for the most part, and a large price discrepancy between a ton of apples and a ton of grapes. And I'm wondering if that's just, or if there is actually a difference in the farming and how much you have to put in to get fruit out of like an acre portion of land.
It's a little bit of a hard question to ask because about a 50, 100-year-old orchard of Gravensteins on standard rootstock, which is dry farmed. And they're planted, the trees are planted 20, 30 feet apart. And, you know, they generally produce an average amount per year. Versus, for instance, if you're trying to accelerate the growth of apples, you're going to do it on a dwarfing or semi-dwarfing rootstock so that you can get fruit rather than the average 7 to 10 or longer years on standard rootstock versus 4 to 7 on, you know, semi-dwarf versus 2 to 3 on dwarfing. And then you can have it planted a lot closer, but your yields won't be as high. And then we're also talking about different varieties. So certain things like Kingston Black tend to be biennial bearing. That's just their habit. So every other year, then you're going to have a low year. Then you're going to have a higher year, and you're trying to like work out your orchard sourcing. So I know that that's maybe a little too nuanced. I would say that, you know, we talk to our orchardists, and even right now, they can't tell us what to expect. So we're dealing with climate change. We're dealing with lower yields. We're dealing with very dry situations right now. I would say on the whole, you probably could yield the same amount in terms of maybe tonnage. I mean, I don't know a lot about grapes, so I'm going to not be able to answer that part, but it's possible you can, if you have an old standard orchard, to get really good tonnage on that versus like a more like intensive vineyard. But you still have a lot of, so you maybe don't have so many irrigation, like that's a lot of irrigation that goes on in vineyards. I see it all over here. Everything's irrigated, and that's a ton of expenditure and maintenance and a lot of labor. There's not that much labor with, you can get away, here's the thing.
That's what I was wondering, the labor especially.
Well, if you wanted to do it right, you would go in there and you would prune, and you would go in there and fight codling moth, and you would do all these things, and you would go in there and or whatever. But a lot of that stuff, and then make sure that you go and do multiple rounds of picking. But no, the fact is that you're never going to make as much money growing apples as you are growing grapes. That's impossible. Your tonnage might be similar, but you're going to get a quarter of the price per ton for apples as per grapes, and on the whole, and there's not a whole lot of labor. Again, we're in Northern California. It's been tight. And you might get some labor when there's a lull in the harvest or in the work, and that crew might move on to an apple orchard really quick, in and out. But that's not where it gets. So I think the labor costs, the irrigation, a lot higher probably in vineyards, but you're generally recouping your costs on that. That's why you do it. And with apples, there's a lot less that goes on here in Sonoma County because it's not a super viable, like, don't become an apple farmer and think you're going to make a living. Let's just put it that way. You might be able to do it at running a vineyard, but you're not going to make it as an apple farmer here if that's your only source of income. Not at all.
The same with also vineyards too. Even if you're a 4-acre, like, that's not going to be producing revenue. Like small, like doing what we're doing as small time producers, it takes so much money, and it doesn't actually give you a lot back.
Chenoa, what about your access to fruit? What's that process been like for you?
Are we for grapes as well?
Yeah, I'd love to hear about it for both.
A lot of that has been through connections of Tony Couturier and Caleb Leisure. They were really gracious with the growers that they've been working with for quite some time. And Tony has been making cider for several years and has specifically been working with someone in Occidental as well. So that was really helpful for, I think, just kind of entering the industry, that these were trusted relationships that both these people, especially Tony, have had for, decades. But I certainly believe if this was an industry I entered without having kind of this guidance, it would have been a lot more difficult to get connected and to talk to these specific people like the Testas in Mendocino. I'm not sure if I would ever have been able to have access to their fruit without the longstanding relationship that Tony has. So I think like how it works a lot in many different industries, but this access is also included in like who you have relationships with and so forth.
Rosalind, how about you? What's it been like getting access to fruit?
I mean, apples and grapes are very different for me in terms of access. Grapes, I mean, like Chenoa was saying, it's not, you can't walk in anywhere and expect to get fruit. You definitely, having connections is always easier, but at the same time, there is a lot of grapes out there. There's a lot of fruit available. And especially if you're not like hyper picky, you can probably find something. There are ads up on Wine Business all the time. Yeah, I don't think that access is super difficult for grapes. For apples, honestly, I have never tried to buy fruit. I work with Ellen, and I tell Ellen I'm going to use these grapes, and what apples do you think could go well with this? And then Ellen recommends Jonathan or whatever she's thinking. He presses juice and gives it to me. So as far as apples go, I'm lucky in that I have a very, very, very good connection. Buying apples myself, I wouldn't really know where to start because I don't work in cider. I'm not primarily a cider maker, so access would be hard for me. But that with me, then again, you'd have to ask Ellen this question when it comes to actually buying fruit. Like, is there like a Wine Business site you can go to on it? I don't know. Ellen?
No, I mean, it was for when we moved here, it was a lot of word of mouth. We just talked to this orchardist and this orchardist and this orchardist, and relationships and make contracts with them, probably the same way you all do with grapes. So if I were to go now, and by the way, if you all want apple access, just email me or text me or something. And I'm happy because I've had people ask me, where can I get it? And I'm like, well, try these people and these people and these people. So I'm happy to share that information. And the Slow Food Russian River actually has a nice, it's a little bit outdated, but it's there on their website. And there's probably other organizations that have kind of made a compendium of orchardists, of orchards where you can buy fruit. So I'm happy to share that. I mean, I really want our orchardists to stay in business, orchards to remain intact. And I'm not anti-grape by any measure, but I think we got a good amount of all the things right now. Maybe we don't need to like kill each other to plant each other's stuff. So I'm happy to share that. And we love working with Rosalind, and we work with our neighbors at Two Shepherds too. And we're like, you want some apple juice? Here you go. And then what do they do for us? And I think this is a really nice part. Like, so I know I'm like being all negative, but I'm not always that negative. Liv can attest to that, and Roz can too, because there is a lot of resource sharing, right? We do want each other to succeed, right? Because we're all very similar. Our mentalities are similar, our priorities are similar, our principles are similar. And the more that we all support each other and support the other people who are still out there, it's better for all of us, right? We don't want to be alone in this island of crap. We want other people making cool stuff. And so I'm happy to support, and we have seen the same with us. So our next door neighbors in our Windsor cidery is Two Shepherds. And, you know, William will be like, hey, I'm getting some carry-on. I got extra. You want some? And we're like, yeah, that'd be super cool. So I don't source grapes, except for like, I do this thing called vinifero where I harvest like Alicante and Faro wild grapes growing at
Doesn't count as sourcing grapes, I don't.
That's not sourcing. That's just like fighting blackberries to get to it. So it's not sourcing at all. That's my foraging. I do a lot of foraging as well. But for sourcing, I you know, like I wouldn't know where to start. I know people in the wine business, but there's no way I could get access to grapes. So I'm super fortunate in being able to get access through our neighbors. And in turn, I give them access to apples, you know? And I think I love to be able to do that because, especially like working with you, Rosalind, you have your, like, the fruit does its thing, but then maybe it has your thumbprint too. So we could be working with the exact same fruit, sourced at the same time, and even though we're doing wild fermentations and all that stuff, it's still going to have its own personality because it does reflect you a little bit. I think it does. And that's kind of woo-woo, but I think it does. So yeah, I mean, we're really happy to help people find apples, and we're super grateful that people help us find grapes.
Is it like the theory where like owners kind of look like their dogs?
Probably true. Rosalind's seen Macy. She's limping all the time, moping.
My wine smells like water.
Yeah.
And they're like super kind and nice, just like me. So sweet. Ellen's
always so gentle. So gentle. All right. So I want to talk about climate change. That's something I spend a lot of time thinking about, our changing climate and how it's getting hotter and drier in California. The past couple of years, especially, the wine industry has been hit really hard with wildfires and smoke taint, affecting the ability to harvest and when they harvest, things like that. It's affected cider a little bit less for a number of different reasons, and I'd like to sort of get into that and talk about climate change, sort of the future of growing in Northern California, and if maybe this like marriage between apples and wine can be a really good step forward in combating climate change. Rosalind, I'd love for you to share your thoughts on that first.
So if we're talking about fires, differences between grapes and apples, the big one is the skins. The skins are so important. Smoke in vineyards and grapes, which basically means the grape skins suck in smoke molecules, and then the resulting wine can be smoky. No bueno. We don't want to make that. We don't want to sell that. No one wants to drink that. Apples, and I don't know why I tell you, but apples don't have that same issue. The skins are less porous, more waxy. They don't let smoke in. And so in a climate that's going to be continuously smoky, which God forbid it's that way this year, I really hope it's not. But in a world that, you know, sees smoke every harvest. So last year, for example, a lot of the winemakers I work with had to drop 30 to 50% of their contracts because the grapes were just unusable, which is not a sustainable way to make wine. The same thing didn't happen with apples. So apples definitely represent and we've talked about this, the four of us before, and it's definitely a big conversation that everyone's having. Apples represent a way forward that, allows us to continue making delicious fermented beverages without worrying about smoke nearly as much as we worry about it with grapes.
Have you been affected by smoke taint in the past? What's been your process with that?
Last year, we lost a vineyard because of smoke taint. It was actually what we made the risotto with, so it was a Syrah vineyard, and we picked it, I think, in mid-September for a risotto, and then wanted to come back, I think 3 weeks later, and we're just we're gonna push it. We're gonna wait till after the heat wave comes, so the grapes have time to mellow out and are extremely stressed. And then immediately after that heat wave came through, the glass fire hit and the whole vineyard was smoked out. And it's very apparent in the grapes. We had people at the winery that actually still purchased the grapes, and instantly you could smell. I think this was like a very extreme level, because there are other areas where we did source grapes from that were surrounded by fires but weren't in the evacuation zone. And so when they came in, it was like there was more of a kind of a mild scent. But this one that came in through the glass fire, which was in Chenoa, it was completely smoked out. And when the grapes came in, they smelled smoky. While they're fermenting, they smelled smoky. Like after it fermented, smoky, just completely, and not in a edgy way, in a very kind of sad way. But we did make. There's the LNU fire. We did source Columbard from right in this little pocket in Solano County, Green Valley, but it actually was had this like hillside that just had this San Pablo breeze like kind of push through it. So even though this area was evacuated, for some reason the smoke was not sitting on top of the vineyard. It was just being pushed out by this bay, and this little pocket also happens to be like 8 degrees colder in the surrounding area. But because of that fear, we did a sparkling wine and just did direct press. And so there's certainly a lot. I think a lot of our decisions, and I'm sure Rosalind can attest to it, that we made in 2020 were because of fires and fear of what could come out of it.
Made a lot of rosé this year. I don't like rosé, but I made a lot of rosé because those red grape skins with the smoke on them, not good.
Well, it's all. I mean, we made a red from Carignan from Mendocino, right on Calpella, which was also a very smoky area. And so far, right, we haven't experienced smoke taint, but it's not something we'll know until it's a finished wine. So our fingers are crossed for the reds that we sourced, but everything else that we made, we just picked early, and that was kind of advice that we got from Caleb. Was like, I think this is a year to pick early, and that's something we kind of have to start looking at too, which is going to really affect the wines. Because I mean, there's some wines that are great doing longer hang time, and there's some varietals that will benefit off that you want to work with, but they're just concentrated in these high fire risk areas.
Thanks for sharing that. I just want to say that we are going to do we're going to have time for Q&A towards the end of this. So if people want to start dropping questions into the chat, we'll be able to spend a little time and try to go through those. Ellen, I just want to pass to you and see if you have anything to add, thinking about if and how fires, I know they've affected your life personally, but if they've affected, if they've affected the products that you're making at Tilted Shed. And also how you're thinking about growing the fruit that you do grow. If you're thinking about like planting different types of apples, things like that.
Right. Well, as Rosalind said, that apples thankfully are not affected by smoke. And we had so much smoke starting in mid-August. I mean, when the Gravensteins were ready through, the Walbridge fire, we were actually technically in the evacuation zone here, and our Lost Orchard was also in the evacuation zone. And there's a lot of smoke, and then through the glass fire as well. So it just, it was just horrible all harvest long. And we had a lot of people asking us, are you going to be affected by smoke taint? And we're like, sure hope not. And we don't, and I did some research on it. There's not been a lot of research on this, but you know, the cuticles around the apples, the skins are less porous, definitely. And then also think about the, you know, the physiology or whatever, like the components of apple flesh, right? So it's not all that juice. We have to extract the juice. You have so much more for it, whatever the smoke molecules to really invade the grape versus the apple. So that thankfully is not a problem. And same with pears or any other pome fruit. I don't anticipate that it is. Our biggest concern really is water. I mean, there's so much to be concerned about, but the lack of precipitation is extraordinary right now. It is just, we have gold-rich soils, which don't, I mean, they're very, you know, sandy loam, not a lot of organic matter. We do try to enhance that through cover cropping and no-till and all the good things, but it's awfully dry, and there's no hope in sight. I mean, it's brutal out here. We're in exceptional drought already, and it's only May.
How much of water do you need to dry farm apples? Is it the same? Is it
well? So yeah. So with apples, so let's dial back. Earlier I talked about rootstock, and so all the old orchards that you see here in Sonoma County, you know, those nice big graceful, you know, trees. They're on something called standard or seedling rootstock. And what that means essentially is that they can have deeper tap roots and more surface area roots. It takes longer for them to fruit. They'll be taller, but they're definitely more set up for drought tolerance. Therefore, on the whole, almost all the orchards that you see here, the old orchards, are dry farmed. What does that mean? It means they only get their irrigation from the clouds. Precipitation is the only moisture that they get. Usually that's not a problem. Here in Sonoma County, where I live, our average is 38 inches a year. But what's been happening is we've only gotten 15 inches this year. We're supposed to have a rainy season from early October through maybe early May, and it's contracting, and it's contracting. And then during that time, it's getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And then it's starting to get windier and windier. So your evaporation loss is even worse. So even these old orchards, which have been established without supplemental irrigation at all, and you know, it's just like dry farm vineyards, right? Like the vines, we have 8 grapevines growing all over here that we don't irrigate, and they're just going crazy. So if they can really root down and be, you know, at the very beginning, cultivated for dry farming, right? Water them a lot, get them established, pick the right rootstock, let them rip, and then it's fine. But what we're having right now is something that's unprecedented with the combination of heat, wind, and contracted rainy season. So these orchards are not getting irrigated. And I don't know what the future will hold for them, because I don't think they've been through this kind of stress even during the mid-70s. So I don't know what's going to happen. But if you're like our orchard here at our farm, we're using MM111, which is a semi-standard rootstock, because we wanted to accelerate the fruiting process. So 4 to 7 years rather than 7 to 10 or longer. That means supplemental irrigation. And so I'm running drip irrigation going like, is this how I should be using the water that's left in my earth? You know, like that's a hard thing, is to really reconcile the fact that you're using water to grow drink, not food, you know, because it's pretty dire, and I don't want to be like bummed out about it, but that's the thing that we're really thinking about. So we selected this rootstock. In other parts of the country, they'll be using a dwarfing rootstock where they can do real tight trellis, high irrigation, high fertility needs, but really pump out the fruit really quickly. But we wouldn't do that because that's totally irresponsible, right? We want to use less water, and we don't want that. So, you know, if we were to do it again, ideally, the ideal thing to do to prepare for climate change and for all the things is to keep those old orchards intact, to top work them to varieties you like, but they're already established. If anything has the chance to survive dry farming and climate change, it's those old orchards. They're super resilient. It's not to plant new orchards on semi-dwarfing rootstock. Okay, it definitely is not that. If we could have afforded it, we couldn't afford it when we moved here, because if you have an existing orchard, you can do a real quick permit thing to convert that to a vineyard, and it makes it cheaper. So all that stuff was going for a lot of money. We had to buy raw land and plant to it. So if we were to do it again, we would do it on standard rootstock, you know, wait longer, but get that stuff ready for no irrigation at all. Water is a super huge problem. I know that there was a really great presentation earlier about ecological and regenerative wine growing practices. All that stuff has to be numero uno: rainwater catchment, keeping the carbon in the soil, and retaining water, and really getting things ready to go without water for weird amounts of time. Because then what's going to happen, maybe next year we're going to get another flood like we did before, and the Lost Orchard was flooded out and we had over 60 inches of rain. So it's going to be like this. And so just really building for resilience and being really mindful of your water use, I think, is a big thing for us. And I don't know how all the different heat spikes are going to affect it. It does. There's a lot of sunburn. There's a lot of loss. And we're dealing with diseases we haven't seen before. So I think that that's also going to come into play, because things are changing so much. We're getting different pests. We're getting different diseases. So it's going to be hard, even for apples.
Thanks for sharing all that, Ellen. It's always great to hear you talk about that kind of stuff, and it's most certainly top of mind for any grower, especially in California, but I think anywhere around the world. This climate change continues to affect us, and the rootstock conversation is a really good one to have. Yeah, for sure. So shifting gears slightly, before we move over to Q&A, I'd love to talk a little bit about what the reception has been like for buyers and thinking about how you're selling co-ferments. So are you putting co-ferment on the label when you're bringing it to a bottle shop or to a distributor and you're saying this is a blend of these different things? What's the reception like? How much education are you having to do? What has that process been like for you? Chenoa, I'll kick it off for you to start.
I think it's been pretty receptive. I think sometimes there's well, when we first released our cider, we didn't disgorge it, and so the reception was back and forth on what we had from that. But I think people were really sorry, my dog is loud. I think people were really intrigued by the co-ferments and seeing something that is inherently cider in terms of like the percentage, but that is a different color. I think that is like very much kind of changing the perspective. And I think to a consumer, it's intriguing too, because like people like color and they kind of like to see like these bright fuchsias, and it's amazing to kind of hear those responses, how someone will taste the cider and they will think it's a Lambrusco. And it's very much not at all, but kind of entering, I think we kind of talked about this, and Ellen could probably speak more to it on when we chatted about a week ago, but just kind of this idea that people should be drinking more cider, and it's actually like a very fascinating drink. And I think co-ferments are a way to kind of invite people that aren't in the cider world into it and start understanding this dialogue and getting more connected. But I think right now fruit co-ferments have been really widely celebrated. But I know it hasn't been like that in the past.
Build on that, actually. I think one of my favorite things about co-ferments, they share, so a co-ferment of grapes and apples is going to have some qualities of a cider and some qualities of a wine. And it's very interesting. So if I give a co-ferment that I made, Columbard and Jonathan Apple, for example, if I give it to Ellen to taste, she tastes it and she's like, man, this is like very like wine-esque. Like she picks out the wine parts of it because those are different to her palate. If I give it to a wine drinker, the first thing they say is like, oh, this is very cider-esque. And so it makes it very approachable to both sides of the spectrum. Whether you normally drink ciders or normally drink wines, there's something comforting about them, but there's also something immediately different and interesting and worth pursuing. And so, like Chenoa was saying, they are a good bridge, especially in a community that mostly drinks wine. It's a really great way to get people interested in something that's not grape-based or not entirely grape-based. And I think that and wine drinkers are going to probably be interested in ciders anyway, because there are so many similarities there already, but especially with the co-ferment, because it has such ties to wine flavor and texture and profile wise, it's a really, really, really like easy thing to start drinking, basically. And so the reception for co-ferments, I think overall, from what I've seen, has been like, people are psyched. They taste good. They're not like super different, but different enough that they're interesting and great, and we want to drink them.
Ellen,
One more thing. Sorry.
oh yeah, please.
I just want to say that I think like it actually invites like another consumer base, like people that are more like my father is very much a beer drinker and is like, doesn't like the gluten and slowly started to get into cider, but is not a wine drinker because he can't do it because of just like his heart, like him getting heartburn. And so when I introduced him to cider, like the cider co-ferment with wine, it was really kind of an incredible experience because it's nothing he's ever tried before. He doesn't really drink wine. He's just entering the cider world. And it's amazing to see how you can kind of shift someone's palate that can't handle like wine because of certain health issues, but then can't handle beer anymore because of the gluten and the bloating and everything that goes with that. And so it's this really like fine middle line, I think, that can be widely accepted from multiple different people.
Ellen, I'm sure you have an opinion you'd like to share.
Opinion with a capital O. I'll take it just from, let's just talk about how I talk about co-ferments. I mean, we've been so cider specific for 10 years now that we're known for that. But I don't want to speak to how difficult it's been to get our stuff really picked up in the market. It has not done well. We really don't distribute. We don't have a distributor. We're very primarily direct to consumers, a few shops that take our stuff and a few restaurants, but that's about it. So we've changed over time as to how I talk about what we do. But we've been really well known for cider for some time. And so we have our following already, which has been great. And we're really appreciative of that. Something that I have found of interest is I have like hardcore cider fans. Like I only drink stuff with apples in it or cider. Okay. And so they really identify themselves as cider drinkers. So I'm talking about a totally different world from your usual natural wine drinker, right? On the whole, a lot of times they come from beer and get really into cider. That's sort of been the trajectory on the whole. And then they become like hardcore cider fans. As we've been really focusing on direct to consumer and as I call cool shit in small batches. So we're making like really finite, small amounts of stuff and it's sold out and it's gone. And, we're doing 25 different things a year. And it's really geared toward like Redfield and a few of our core people and mostly just direct sales. So we're not looking at trying to sell like big volumes to different people and change their minds about cider. I don't even waste my time on that anymore. I'm talking to our core fans and I'm trying to like get them excited about different flavor profiles and different experiences. And I am finding that, so we've been doing, ever since we really dropped distribution and doing some really the most direct to consumer, is I'm finding some of our hardcore cider fans are like, I don't like your grape apple co-ferments. They taste too much like wine. And they don't want it. So they'll be like, don't put that in my cider club shipment. It's a really funny thing. So I'm finding it from a different spot where we'll get to these sites. And I used to be super dogmatic. I'll tell you, I used to be, that person preaching the word of cider and like never adulterate it with any of this other stuff and only apples. But that's dogmatic and it doesn't help anybody. We always were interested in fermenting all the things. I mean, we did lacto fermentation. We did our own sourdough. We did it all. Why would you be dogmatic about just using one fruit? You can't be that way. Do your best with the apples, but if you want to do something special and explore a new flavor profile or a new world, do it. And so it's been really interesting, the reaction I've been getting to our hardcore cider fans who don't like Sunbow, who are not into Super Diva, who are, you know, who aren't, everybody loves Labor, which is our foraged blackberry, wild elderberry, Gravenstein co-ferment. Somehow the red just like breaks through it. But a lot of people have been resistant to Twain or to Viniferal, and they just have this hang up. So for me, I've been trying to figure out, like, how do I get my hardcore cider drinkers to be more, to think about different things and to expand their palates a little bit. I want everybody to really appreciate apples, and I can go on and on and on about that. But I feel like with co-ferments, I'm still trying to push you. I'm still trying to help you, you know, learn more about your palate and learn more about fruit. And I think that experience is great. You know, they always say, I don't like wine. And I'm like, you're probably drinking really bad wine. Go get some good wine. Try some of this. And that's why I like to hype my friends' stuff, because then you're going to have an appreciation for it. And so that's been a real interesting thing that I found of late, because we've been doing a lot more co-ferments and meeting resistance about it. But it probably has also opened it up to maybe more wine drinkers. I don't really know. I only do it because I think it's cool. I don't do it with a marketing or branding perspective. I absolutely base everything on the wrong reasons.
I don't think that's true.
Are we here to sell things? I don't know. Hopefully, maybe.
I mean, I think that's really interesting, and I also used to be like pretty dogmatic about cider, and it's totally changed, and my thinking on that has totally changed. And I think, I mean, Ellen, I don't want to speak for you, but I was also like pretty defensive of cider for a long time. Like, people don't understand this. Like, they need to understand this. Like, this is like our baby. It's amazing. And opening Redfield has like blown all of my thinking around that just like out of the water. And I actually want to like, I almost like want to like thank the natural wine industry, because it's like really opened up my thinking around like experimentation and like having fun and trying things and making mistakes and getting better and learning and like mashing things together that weren't together before. Because the best co-ferments I've had have been from winemakers. Like, definitely. I mean, cider makers make great co-ferments too, but I've just had more access to them because I've seen more winemakers be like, I want to mess around with apples. Then I've seen more cider makers say, I want to mess around with grapes. And so I'm actually really grateful for the perspective I've gotten being able to like be immersed in the natural wine industry over the past 2+ years, because it's changed my palate and it's changed my thinking. And I do think in general, like, drinking needs to be fun. And I hope that like winemaking and cider making is fun too. And that's why you're doing it. And having that element of like experimentation and loosening up the rules in general, I think it's a net positive. Yeah. Will Reyes says,
You know that? I wasn't talking just about you, Will, but you're one of them. Oh, you're cool. You're cool. Still
all right, I have actually a long list of questions, but I'm going to switch over to the Q&A because I want to tackle some of these. So a question from Amanda Kimbrough. What are the agricultural labor practices like in apples? Are exploitative labor practices as big of an issue in orchards as they are in some vineyards? Ellen, maybe actually you should take this one.
The orchard crews are generally the same as the vineyard crews around here in the large orchards. So I'd like to believe that we're not exploiting them. But we have, for instance, we get a lot of apples from a place on Sonoma Mountain. They have a large organic vineyard and a small 30-year-old cider orchard there. And so when the crews are having a break in the vineyard, they'll go over to the orchard. Same with like Vulture Hill. There's one guy, and they try to get a couple of guys who are in between breaks at the vineyards. So it's largely the same crews. There's not like a specific orchard agricultural crew here. Or apples are sort of the afterthought when there's a lull in the vineyard work on the whole. I hope we do talk to our orchardists about who they work with. We also go in and we harvest apples at like the Lost Orchard, and we have a couple of orchardists that pick the fruit themselves, like Laura, one woman just picking her own apples. So there's that too. There's some really small, but the ones like Meyer or Vulture Hill, when they need to have people come in, they'll work with existing vineyard crews.
Rosalind, Chenoa, either of you have anything to add?
My experience with apple orchards is way less than Ellen's, so I'm sure that her answer is going to be the most accurate here.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, and I would say outside California, when you're talking about like orchard production in like Oregon or Washington or even like New England, absolutely there are some of those same issues. And then when you're working with smaller farmers, I think less so, but it's always important to be asking those questions around like, what are your labor practices? Like, who works for you? Who's picking? Where, like, what are they like? You know, how are they treated? In the same way that you're asking questions about how the fruit's grown, right? There needs to be transparency, not just in, you know, when you're talking about regenerative agriculture, like to me, that's as much about people treatment as it is about treating the earth and the soil and thinking about that kind of stuff.
Right. And I would just add on a little bit about that. The fact that we only go with organic or beyond organic, just really minimal. So we're not exposing any crews to, there's some gnarly chemicals and pesticides and herbicides and things like that that are applied to apple orchards. Not here. Most of them are organic here, but the pesticides that are applied to orchards can be even worse than in vineyards. So it's a very, you want us, so we definitely support only organic. And part of it is by paying top dollar that them. So that's one of the reasons we'll pay it. We know that that money needs to go to paying people. And just as a little aside, I started a zine a few years ago called Malice, and my friend Darlene is editor now, and this is a topic she's been covering is labor. So we can't divorce, you know, our desire for joy and experimentation from the impacts on the environment and on people. And so I think it's definitely something that always should come to the fore, just as everything. You know, you need to have principle, you need to have pleasure at the same time, but you can't exclude one for the benefit of the other. So I think it's an important question.
And Darlene, you can chime in on the chat if this is true, but I'm pretty sure it is. There is an article online from a recent Malice issue written by Megan Larmer from New York State, talking about her experience in orchards and migrant labor coming through and working with them and sort of the history of it, and thinking about the like agricultural visa program. It's an amazing article and I highly recommend it. Actually, Darlene, maybe you could like drop it in the chat, the link to it, if that's possible. I don't know if I'm asking you to be too tech savvy, but Will, all over it. I really highly recommend, even just thinking about like vineyard labor too, reading that piece by Megan. Very talented writer. All right, only a couple minutes left. That was the only question that we got. Maybe it's just like a wrap up. I think this has been an amazing conversation. Maybe as a wrap up, just saying what you think the future of like co-ferments and cider are in your next couple of vintages. Is this something you're going to keep doing? Is it something you're excited about? What can we look forward to from you three amazing, talented cider winemakers?
You have to call him someone, remember?
Sorry.
Come on, call him someone.
You go first. You go first.
I'm not doing this myself.
There's a lot of hand holding going on here.
I need that, okay? The Zoom things are hard, okay? This isn't even Zoom. It's called Hopin or something. Anyway, yes, I will be doing more of them. They are, I mean, making wine is fun also, but making something other than wine that I'm not as familiar with that offers lots of opportunity for experimentation and change and ideas and collaboration with people like Ellen. Yeah, it's great. I'm going to do more. It's super fun. I love doing it. And then I also love, I know Ellen said she's met some resistance with her co-ferments. I have not. People that drink wine, if you're a winemaker, so from what I've seen, if you're a winemaker making wine and you put out a co-ferment, everyone is psyched. And so it's fun to sell something that people are psyched about. So yes, it's both fun to make, it's fun to sell, it's fun to watch people drink. It's definitely a thing that I'd like to make more of. I've started really small because as I've said before, I have very little experience with apples, so it makes sense to like do it little bits at a time so you can make mistakes and throw out small batches if you have to. But as I get better at it, I'd like to make larger batches. Hopefully Ellen will help me with this. But yeah, more is good.
I guess I should also just like chime in and say that as the one retailer in this group, that my reception from people at Redfield has just been like overwhelmingly in support of co-ferments and more experimentation, and we also have a lot of people who come in who just like solely identify as natural wine drinkers and like found cider through that, and that's been a huge percentage of people coming in our door, and we're really grateful for that. So like, just throwing out that Ellen's experience is really valid, and I think is coming from a cider perspective, but where Redfield falls in the camp of more people just being really open to that type of stuff. Chenoa, do you want to go next about if you're going to keep doing co-ferments and what you're excited about in the coming vintages?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, I would love to do the same co-ferment that I did last year. Unfortunately, the Carignan vineyard is because of climate change and its lack of water, it's slowly dying or quickly dying. I think maybe last year could have been the last year of production. They're 74-year-old dry farmed, but this year they're not producing at all. They're just shooting out, which is pretty devastating. So I don't know if our cider will be the same, the co-ferment. It might have just been a one-year thing, which is sad, but also just is kind of the magic and the beauty of making wine on a small scale and working with growers, is that you never know what can happen, and at least there's that. This was like one last year of holding that space in that place. But moving forward, I would love to just do cider. I want to do co-ferments with cider, but I also just want to do like 100% ciders. So love to talk to you more, Ellen, about people you know and have connections to, because I've certainly have fallen in love with it as I see it has for other people. But I certainly think that's where a lot of kind of like my unexpected interest had come out of in the wine industry has been this cider and co-ferments with it.
Love that. Ellen, what about you? Are you gonna keep making cider?
Oh, I don't know. Thinking about it. I'm gonna change my name. Yeah, of course we are. Yeah, of course. But I mean, I love doing the co-ferments. Like I said, I'm really into food shed ferments. It's always been something I've been really interested in, and I just keep doing it. We also do distillation projects, and so we make pommeau with sometimes with different botanicals or straight apple. I studied herbalism years ago, and I wanted to be a flower farmer until I realized I don't like cutting flowers, which is like a key thing to do if you're really a flower farmer. But I love that element, and so I would love to actually, Rosalind and I might be doing a little project together. But I mean, I love the collaborative part of it. I love the transformational part of it. I love the little magic and the little joy. And like I said, we've been doing this now for 10 years. So we have a pretty good idea of what, apples are going to do year by year in the varieties. And that's super cool and exciting. But we only did this because we love the magic and joy and the transformation that happens in fermentation and watching something start from, you know, a little tiny fruit and seeing where it goes in a year or two. And to limit ourselves to just one thing feels like we're denying ourselves some pleasure and denying other people experiences. So we'll keep doing it as long as the fruit keeps growing and then we keep enjoying it.
Amazing. Amazing. I just wanted to, as we wrap up, just say thank you one more time to the sponsor of our panel, Pipe & Couture and Threads Collection. Thank you so much for sponsoring this panel with these amazing, amazing women. I'm so grateful for you all. Thank you for joining and taking the time and talking about this with us. And if you're in the Bay Area and want to try any of these beverages, come to Redfield. I'll hook you up. Got you covered.